Let's talk.
John Brown.
The age of diagnosis, sickness, health, and why medicine has gone too far. From autism to allergies, ADHD to long COVID, more people are being labelled with medical conditions than ever before. But can a diagnosis do us more harm than good? That's the question posed by Suzanne O Sullivan, who joins us live on the line now. Good morning to you, Suzanne. That was probably my best introduction of my entire broadcasting career, Suzanne. And I'm sure. And as my Welsh grandmother says, and I always say, I looked around and there she was gone. So there you go.
Oh, it's your worst nightmare when the internet just crashes. I'm so sorry. I'm sure it was glowing.
I have worse nightmares than that. Trust me. Now then, we're talking about your book, which is obviously called The Age of Diagnosis. Just give me a little bit of background about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a full-time NHS doctor. I'm a consultant neurologist, and I work with people with diseases like epilepsy and psychosomatic conditions. But I also write about health-related issues for the general public, kind of raising awareness about things that concern me.
One of the things that people are going to be looking at the moment is because of the recent the announcements over the past couple of days about the shake-up of NHS England and the way that's going to go, and long-term people being on long-term sickness benefits or receiving whatever. People will say, well, the problem is because the health service has gone, and here comes the W word, the health service has gone woke. ADHD, that wasn't an option when I was at school. There was just a kid who wouldn't sit still at the back of the classroom. So what are we looking at here, Suzanne? Are we saying that that people can self-diagnose themselves far too much, and it's perhaps an easier option to just go, okay, well that's they've got that, they've got this, and then go just throw some money at them, kind of thing. I mean, what's your standpoint on it?
Well, I mean, my standpoint isn't that we've all gone woke and that everyone is just complaining. It certainly isn't my standpoint. But I think we've had we had a chronic underdiagnosis and neglect problem for many years. When I went to school in the 70s, 80s, nobody had special learning needs. Nobody got any extra support. And that clearly cannot have been right. There must have been kids who could have flourished had they been recognized as having special needs. So we understood that we had a problem, and then we started to correct it. We thought that perhaps learning problems and mental health problems came in milder forms, so we started looking for them. And that's all a really great thing. I think it was really important because mental health and learning problems were stigmatized. The difficulty now, I think, is that in actually quite a well-meaning way, I would say it's gone too far. So we had this kind of assumption that, if special accommodations in school and support for people with mental health problems works for severe or moderately severe people, it'll work even better or more for people in the milder group. But I think what's happened is we've gradually relaxed the diagnostic criteria for all these conditions to make them more inclusive, but it's not working. If it was working, we should be seeing, 27% of children in England are getting special accommodations in school. If giving a diagnosis and helping children worked, we should be seeing happier, better adjusted adults. But we are just seeing higher mental health rates in adults also. So I think a well-meaning thing has gone a bit wrong. And because we live in an age of social media and the internet, people are seeing this and going, oh, well, that's obviously what I've got. They are self-diagnosis. They are going in, if you like, Are they going in with already saying that that's not wrong with it, but they're saying, oh, I think I've got ADHD, I think I've got PSTD. I mean, I was listening to somebody talking about PIPs yesterday, and they were saying, oh yeah, PSTD is now a major problem. Now I always thought, because I went to school in the 70s and 80s, and I thought PSTD was something you got if you'd been in combat, for example. Now that's just me being a 50-something-year-old male, but so if you go in and saying, I think that I'm suffering from ADHD, PSTD, mild forms of whatever, then it's with an overstretched, underfunded health service. Perhaps it's an easy to go, right, you tick that box, here's what we're going to do with you. One size fits all, if you like. Yeah, I think that basically first of all, the information on social media is just phenomenally unreliable. Studies of TikTok posts about things like ADHD and autism are, inaccurate the vast majority of time. So people are getting a lot of really inaccurate information from social media. They're also very often distilling these disorders down to a single thing. I feel, I'm not very good at eye contact, therefore I have autism, or, they're not understanding the complexity of what is required for a good diagnosis of these things. I think that self-diagnosis is a problem because, diagnosis is a terribly complicated and nuanced thing, and you cannot detect a diagnosis in yourself. You really do need the expertise. I'm not absolutely convinced that social media is the big problem, though, because, it's quite a received wisdom thing now to say that social media is at the root of all evil when it comes to mental health of young people. But actually, when you look at the scientific evidence, there's no evidence of that. There is evidence that vulnerable people perhaps use social media more. Vulnerable people are vulnerable, and if they weren't developing problems because of contact with social media, it may be something else. I'm not sure that we can put it all down to social media. We must also remember there's lots of good things on social media that tend not to be spoken about. I think we've got a bit of societal collusion between scientists, doctors, researchers, and the general public. People want answers, and increasingly we are able to give answers, and it's a bit of a folie à deux that we have got ourselves in this situation.
Okay, well, here's one that, for example, I've got teenage goddaughters, and they come to me if they've got a situation, for example, they've got to get a bus from, say, or a train from Cordoba to Madrid or Cordoba to Malaga. They go, well, can you not do it for me because I suffer from anxiety? Now, again, 30 years ago, you may have been, that is apparently a thing they can say. They're suffering from high levels of anxiety, whereas we would have been told, and I'm not saying, bring back hard parenting, but do you see where I'm coming from here, Suzanne?
Yeah, no, I totally understand. And I think it's all about, these kind of labels. So, people have always suffered from anxiety, and I don't want to belittle the sort of experience of that for the people who are having it. But the problem exists when you start giving it medical labels, because once you kind of give somebody, if you are someone who's not good at doing this or not good at doing that, or this isn't your strength, this is your weakness, etc., that's one thing. But the minute you give someone a label, you risk the labeling effect. And that means focusing people on the things they cannot do and potentially reinforcing it. And you're really describing it there. Part of being a teenager is learning what you're good at, what you're bad at, learning to overcome things that are difficult. But if you say, well, I now suffer with anxiety and here's the list of things I cannot do as a result, then how are you ever going to overcome them?
Yeah, one of the things surely is for a functioning health system, be it mental, physical, is the aim surely is to return them into to help them live as normal lives as possible. And therefore, if you say, well, here's your, you have anxiety, you have mild whatever, then it's, if you like, it's kind of a get out clause. And surely the aim of a health service is to have people live normal, healthy, well-adjusted lives without having labels.
Yeah, I'm very anti-label because I think it produces it really reinforces, it causes a person to really examine what they can't do. They lower their expectations for themselves. Other people have lower expectations. A label is a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy sometimes. I think that basically that doesn't mean that people aren't suffering. And that doesn't mean that people make the point, that the world is set up more kind of appropriately for some people than other people, or some people feel different and the world isn't working for them. That's fine. It may well be the case, and it may well be that we need to be better in schools at adjusting to different needs, and that society needs to adjust to different needs. But it is the medicalizing that is the problem, because it makes something feel like it cannot be overcome.
Is it the problem as well? Is if you're saying, okay, there's a wide variety of people, a wide bunch of people who suffer from this particular, a mild form of whatever it is, then the people who really need it, who really, really need it, are not going to get the treatment they do because it's being distilled.
Yeah, that is my major concern. I work as a neurologist, and I work with people who, well, most of my patients have brain diseases, but many of them have autism, and they are very, very severely disabled. Now, what's the public view of autism now? It used to be in the 1940s when the concept was developed, it was called extreme autistic aloneness, and the people who had it were no more interested in other people than filing cabinets and bookshelves. That was the description of it now. Now, who has autism? Elon Musk, Anthony Hopkins. Well, these are so far apart. And now, unfortunately, the people at that mild end of the spectrum are the ones that are visible to the general public. So basically, they're creating an impression of autism that is a little bit romanticized sometimes. You can be an amazing actor or, top of your game and you have autism. Autism is a very hard thing to live with. And I think that the public view of it is not doing those with severe autism any favors. Plus, it is very much muddying the water of research. If you've got the Anthony Hopkins levels of people in the same research study as the severe autistic person who can't leave the house, then the likelihood of finding some commonality in those people's brains is very low.
And also the other situation is with something like autism, because very good friends of mine, their son has autism, and it's a case of it, because it's not just the child it affects, it's the parents who have to grow and learn, because it is an incredibly hard thing to do. I mean, it's incredibly hard to bring up a child anyway, but when you have a child who suffers from this, and hats off to them, because he's balanced, he has a normal life, but he is autistic, and but he's just a little bit different, I suppose, to being, and if you say, oh well, I'm Anthony Hopkins and I'm an actor and therefore I've suffered more, or Elon Musk, then as you said, it takes away, doesn't it, some of the stress, some of the real struggles that are there.
I think it trivializes. I mean, for anyone who's ever seen anyone with severe autism, I mean, it is a phenomenally difficult condition to live with, and for families to manage. I mean, it is a very challenging condition. But even in the more moderate levels, people do have a lot of extra special needs. And I think it's very trivializing for them to be compared with people who have actually progressed entirely normally throughout with successful careers and successful families. It gives the impression that that's what autism's like, and it really isn't. You
say in the book we're in danger of turning healthy people into patients. Is it a case that we are raising generations of potential hypochondriacs? I mean, what do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean actually is, I'm not talking about hypochondria there. I'm talking about, so this is occurring in every field of medicine. So not just with regards to learning problems or mental health problems, with regards to high blood pressure, diabetes, cancer, osteoporosis, huge lists of medical diagnoses are having their diagnostic criteria relaxed. And all the time, every time they relax them, they say, well, maybe if we just capture a few more people on the edge of normal, abnormal, we'll help more people. But every time they adjust that normal abnormal line just slightly more in one direction, they draw healthy people into being patients. So, for example, I think it was in 2017, they adjusted expert committees adjust what it means to have high blood pressure. And overnight, through lowering the high blood pressure from 140/90 to 130/80, more than 50% of UK adults became hypertensive. One day they were not patients, the next day they were.
Here's the thing, it just struck me as I'm doing this, is the fact that we've never had more information about how to live healthy lives out there than we talk about. The internet it can be a healthy thing, and we know that diet, exercise, mindfulness, etc., are great steps in combating these and living a healthy lifestyle. But at the same time, we are all living more sedentary lifestyles. We order in fast food. We don't leave the house because of a variety of cultural climatic so perhaps we are creating the perfect storm in times of, yes, we know what we should be doing, but that's kind of a hard option, and therefore it's easy to say, well, I'd like, the reason that we're seeing more clinically obese people, 25% of the population is seen as down in Spain, where I am, the Mediterranean diet has been praised, but we are seeing, again, children getting bigger and bigger. I don't mean size, I don't mean in terms of height. In China, we are seeing the fast food diets, and again, the facts that they're on screens and video. And I'm a gamer myself, and I live on social media. But what I'm saying is, we are creating a circumstance here where you can just go, oh well, I would do this, but I've got, I don't know, overactive this, or I'm diabetic, or this, because of what you've been doing to yourself.
Yeah, I think, I do think a little bit of the difficulty, it's how do you create a mentally healthier child or adult? How do you create a physically healthier child or adult? By addressing deprivation, by giving people healthier lives. And I think that that's where this sort of medicalizing of minor difficulties is very low value medical care. You turn someone into a patient, they gain very little from it, and society loses a lot. The high value care would be improving lives for people, improving lives for children, improving diets. If we're worried about social media itself worries me considerably less than the fact that social media stops kids going out and playing in the road and being physically active. I would like to see us, replace this concept of let's capture more and more and more patients with this diagnosis and replace that with let's look at social change to improve lives for people, which we know works.
What was the spark then that led you to write this book, Suzanne? Was it you were generally being disturbed, unhappy with the sort of the capture of these people, or were you getting feedback from your own work on quote unquote the front line, as it were, and more professionals saying this is getting silly now?
Yeah, no, this it entirely arose out of my own clinical work. So I'm a full-time NHS neurologist, and a lot of my patients I see are quite young. They're maybe in their 20s. And basically, I'm seeing all these young people come in with lists, 10, 15 medical diagnoses, depression, autism, ADHD, and a variety of physical things as well. But none of them seem to be benefiting from those labels. I wouldn't mind how many labels they have if at the end of it they were happy or better adjusted. But every label was leading to a new label. Once they were in the medical system, they were being increasingly medicalized. So it's a really concern for me that we are doing something quite harmful to young people. So
what conclusions can we draw? And what can we do to break free of these labels? What do you recommend, Suzanne?
Yeah, first of all, I don't want to say to anyone, if you have a medical label or your child does and you genuinely feel it's benefiting you, I'm not asking anyone to give anything up. What I would like us to do is to just, first of all, I think the key thing is, can't we help struggling children without labeling them? Can't we, you should be able to look at a child in school and say, listen, that kid's not happy or that kid's not doing well, and give them support without telling them the brain is neurodevelopmentally abnormal. I'm just kind of trying to wake people up to this kind of harm of labeling difference as medical. A medical label is not inert, and a medical label focuses you on everything you cannot do. So I think just kind of trying to say to parents, if you're in that borderline zone, you don't know what to do, just examine, how much am I going to get from this diagnosis and how much can I lose from this diagnosis? I want people to be empowered to think about this and ask the doctors the right questions.
The book is called The Age of Diagnosis, Sickness, Health and Why Medicine Has Gone Too Far. You can order it via our own virtual bookstore. It is by Suzanne O Sullivan. Suzanne, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me. Bye.